by You podcast. We got Sherard Duvall on the show today, which is really cool. He's been a friend of ours for a very long time. We've done a lot of work with him. We're in kind of the same industry, so it'd be really interesting to talk to him about the differences and how everything goes. So thank you so much for coming.
Yeah,
welcome.
Man.
So tell me a little bit about your business and how you got to where you are and what do you do?
That's a big question. So I'll just start with Otr Media Group is my company. And we primarily work in 3 different areas, which is documentary film, short and long form, media literacy, or commonly known as media education, whether that's designing curriculums or professional development for teachers or college courses. And then media management, which we've also worked together on, whether I'm helping a company figure out how to launch an initiative or how to manage the media for something or how to manage the media for an event or internal media, what to do with it, how to work it, what type of strategies to use for your media, what media to use for strategies and that kind of thing. So that's kind of like the basis of what it is that we do.
Right.
But in the last, and you know this well, but in the last since maybe August, we've gotten into live stream stuff a lot, which is not a part of our business model, but last year it kind of saved us, and
kind of have to nowadays.
Yeah, and that's a big part of what we do now is the live stream production, digital studio world.
Well, it fits into the strategy of this is what your need is.
Yeah.
Let me help you with that strategy, and we can do that too.
Yeah. But we try to stay. I try to stay when it comes to production. I tried to stay in the documentary lane because that's really our lane. And but thankfully last year, I'm 42 years old, so I've had enough experience in the industry that when there were other needs, I was able to fulfill those needs, and we were able to figure out business models for those needs because I had that experience. And so that's kind of what helped us out last year with the pandemic was experience. It was kind of the key. So
right. So we talk about right now being a time where communicating with audiences is super important, especially since you can't do it in person in a lot of cases.
Oh yeah.
And so we found that there's been a big uptick in people wanting to do videos about themselves, talking to their people, but it's so critical. Like we see so many times where people just make these things that don't seem to be thought out. They're just doing something, and moving forward.
Like the one you sent me
Like the one I sent you yesterday. Brian and I have this ongoing message thing where I go, you got to see this one. I send it over to him.
Yeah.
But I think it's so important to kind of recognize that tendency to take whatever it is that you want to do and adapt to the market.
Yeah.
As the market changes. How did you get to the point where you are doing documentary film? That's not something you just fall into.
So I think what ended up happening. So a little bit of my background. Bill knows this. I don't know how much Brian knows of this, but I was I was a senior producer at Genesis Studios here in Columbia, and that position put me in a place where I was doing a ton of network TV, everything from ESPN to Discovery Channel, Discovery Health, Nutrisystem. You go on VH1, etc. And I had really gotten into that world, thinking that maybe that world was the world that I wanted to go into, because of course it was more money, but it was more on a national stage, and I was thinking about how do I work my way up the ranks there. But I came from the music industry. And when I say came from the music industry, I was always into film. I was even doing film when I was in college. I went to college for media production. I majored in media arts at the University of South Carolina, and there you go. And I was on the film track, and
I didn't.
But I was also DJing, which is where the Shakis comes from, Shakis the Beast, and so I was always, but I spent so much time doing radio, and I had been the pleasure of being on MTV and BET and all that kind of stuff. So I was really deep into the music industry world, and when I got to the network TV world, they felt so similar. It was a lot of fraudulence and a lot of people putting on airs and a lot of what I like to call fakery, and it made me very uncomfortable. And so I was like, I like the amount of money I'm making, and I like these opportunities to work on these dope things, and Cliff had given me a lot of freedom that to be honest. I took advantage of, which is a whole nother story. But I didn't like that world at all. And so I was like, I got to find a way to be able to do film work without that part, because that part reminds me too much of the music industry, and I hate that part. Mm-hmm. And so I actually left, and I still did film. Like if people needed a producer or something like that, I would do that stuff on the side. But I took a position with the Nickelodeon Theater as their media education director, and that introduced me to the amount of money documentary filmmakers make. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, me doing that, I thought documentary was like nickel and diming. You know? I was like, there's no way I could sustain my family. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like the nonprofit kind of world.
Sure.
And then, just working with a lot of documentary filmmakers, talking to a lot of documentary filmmakers, going to a lot of film festivals like Sundance and all that. And I'm like, your budget was what? Mm-hmm. I can definitely do that. And so
I could work with that.
I found a way to marry the film without the fraudulence, because in the documentary world, I get to tell stories that have meaning.
Right.
And so that was really the hard part for me, was where am I going to find our focus? What kind of stories do I want to tell? Which is kind of the genesis of how I built Otr Media Group. It was through that train of thought. I hope that answered the question.
The interesting thing is that I got into it thinking I was wanting to do music stuff too. That's how you and I met originally.
That's right.
I was trying to.
As a DJ.
I started doing wedding films, and then that kind of took off to the point that I could make a living, and I was like, hey, listen, I want to work with musicians. I had the same kind of thought. Now you and I did several music videos where it was lip synced, pre-recorded, whatever performances. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to do live performances. I thought that was where I wanted to fit, and I kind of had the same realization, which is that if they need you, they don't have any money, and if they have the money, they don't need you. And so I kind of found myself sort of stuck in that spot, where if I wanted to make enough money to make a living doing music videos, I would have to get into that part of the industry that I had no idea how to get into. The basis where the money's coming from, right? Not from the artist, but where the money's coming from.
Oh yeah.
And I said, I don't, because I did a music festival in Tennessee, probably 2010 or 11. And we had a very big legendary country artist that was on the music festival. Mm-hmm. And the promoter of the festival got me in touch with the music artist. I got to talk to him directly. And I was doing these acoustic performance videos at the time, and I was just, all it would take was just you and a guitar, and we'll walk out back and do the Bone Show. Yeah.
Bone Show, right.
He didn't own any of his music, so he couldn't play any of his music legally. So all the music that made him famous, he didn't have any access to it. And
yeah, man. I mean,
I was like, you know what? I don't want to be involved in this industry.
I think the reason why I got burnt out in the music industry, because I did radio, right? Mm-hmm. So, and mainstream radio.
Right.
In addition to doing mainstream radio, I did a lot of mainstream TV, and do concerts, all that kind of stuff. So I got a chance to see, I got a chance to interact with record labels a lot, right? When you're a DJ, particularly a popular DJ, meaning I was on the air, every day at noon,
right?
Every Friday and Saturday night. So record labels were like, "Hey, I want you to play my record."
Yeah.
And it was the most nauseating. Going to these conferences and watching these people live these fake lives, and people telling you, that, "Oh yeah, I can get your record played." And I'm like, "No, you can't." That dude he delivers mail for Universal. Mm-hmm. He can't get you, but you don't know, because he actually does work for Universal. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to. It's a big smoke screen.
The conversations we had at rap videos where we take a wad of cash, and you and I would take out $100 bill and wrap it around the outside.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, right? There's so many people. There are, I've met the head of Universal, and I've met a ton of artists. And I've been in rooms with these people, and I know the difference between the people that can actually make something happen and the people that are just talking. Mm-hmm. And it's 90% of the talkers. Right. And it burnt me out. And then at the same time, the music industry was changing when I really started reaching my peak as Shakis the Beast. What I call the strip club wave was just coming in when I was on my way out. So this is the Yin Yang Twins, and when Lil Jon got really big, and and like the dancing changed. Like I would,
Right.
go to parties, be DJing parties. I'm like, I don't remember it being this freaky.
I don't feel very comfortable.
I remember the Luke era, you know what I mean? I remember
Yeah.
the Luke era, but this was different. And I was like, people only are going to dance to like the strip club sounding songs.
And you know what's happened is that's trickled down to weddings now. So they play
they're
play
twerking at
Get
weddings
Low
now?
at weddings.
They're twerking at weddings.
Yeah,
they're twerking
yeah, dude. And it's uncomfortable because like
my thing is,
the 50-year-old ladies are doing it, and it's like I don't understand.
So
what's
my
going
whole
on.
thing was diversity. That's
Right.
what I made my name off of. People knew when they would hear me on the radio, if they came to see me live, it would be a full spectrum. I might go to the 70s all the way to now.
Right.
I'm playing all different types of music, which
Yeah.
is what people like me for.
Yeah.
But the industry was becoming very pigeonholed with what you could play.
Mm-hmm.
And so me having the ability to play a little bit of everything, that wasn't the thing anymore. The
Yeah.
wave was more, can you stay in this world of music the whole time? And that just bored me to death. So that also was one of the things that took me out of the music industry.
Well, I think all that's very interesting because that's how you and I met to begin with.
Yeah.
And I think my transition to doing commercial work came from the idea that I realized that I could take the emotional content that we put into weddings and put it into commercial work. And that was something that was lacking
Interesting.
in the commercial part of the business. Because at the time I was making TV commercials and all they wanted to do is tell you how many locations they had, what their square footage was, how many things that they offered in their inventory.
Oh, yeah. I did some of that.
And it wasn't, it didn't make a connection with me, and I felt like it wouldn't make a connection with the audience, and I made that effort to try to add that emotional content into commercial work, and we were able to do that a lot, and it was unique at a time, and it's becoming a little bit more kind of mainstream now, so we're we're having to figure out kind of what the future looks like, but I think that's interesting that you took that turn towards documentary.
Yeah.
And, I think we worked on one shorter documentary that was very, very difficult. And I was like, I just don't have the patience for, I don't have the patience for 48 interviews.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't have the patience for
building a story out of,
not just that, but like, what's the color look like between the interview we did September and the interview we did in March? Yeah. Oops, it's radically different because I changed lights or I changed lenses or whatever it was, I think the way my brain works, I'm much more sort of attuned to a shorter form thing, and I feel like I have so much more control over something that's shorter form.
I get it. Yeah, some people, and the other thing, I don't like selling stuff.
Right.
And I think my time at Genesis kind of burnt me out on that too. Mm-hmm. We did a ton of selling stuff.
Sure.
And I was like, I want to do film and video.
Yeah.
But I don't want to sell nothing. And I love what you all do. Even here, but it's just not so I don't want to be in that world.
Kind of going back to that change when you said you wanted to go into documentary films. Mm-hmm. Where does that money come from? How do you target those people?
It's a good question.
I was kind of interested in that too.
It's like, I want to be a documentary filmmaker, and I have this great story about birds that I want to tell, but how do you get the funding to do it correctly?
So
who do you need to talk to?
What up, Zach?
So go into that. I kind of explain that because
I will. Because it was fuzzy to me too, and
who's your audience? Basically,
right.
is what I'm getting
I came from the corporate world, you know what I mean, and particularly when I started working with network, our budgets were huge. Even before that, some of the commercials the stuff that I was running for Genesis, the budgets were tremendous.
Yeah.
And so I came from that world. So going into the nonprofit world, I'm automatically thinking, y'all are always begging for money. Like, you can't make a living like that, Mm-hmm. Where are the people that are thinking about how to make money on the front end instead of thinking about how to get money on the back end? And so I discovered that there are many people like me. So how do you make money in the documentary world? So there's several different pots of money in the documentary world. There's several different areas to make money, but the most common area is, and this is probably not going to be a newsflash to you, but there is literally a pool of grant money just for documentary films, and it's in the billions of dollars. I mean, everything from government grants to nonprofit grants to private grants, and they literally are just for documentary. That's the reason why you can have documentary films that have budgets of $30 million, $20 million budgets, because there's all these, and you have these big name docs, not even just a Michael Moore, like a Stanley Nelson, people like that make all of these huge docs a year. And so the front end funding a lot of times will come from that main source, which would be grant funding. But then you also have everything from, people that self-fund films. You have people that use, your Kickstarters and all that kind of stuff to raise money for films. You have there are a lot of people like so there's a whole network of people like in the independent film world. So, you have your Brad Pitts that has like his major stuff he does, but Brad Pitt also has documentary stuff as well as indie film, right? So you'll find like, you'll have that famous actor you hadn't heard of. You're like, how come I hadn't seen him in 10 years? And then you go to the independent movie section and he's got like 10 movies, right? Because they're putting their money in that stuff, right? And so that is the whole market for that in the documentary world, where you have these major these production companies that are minor but are run by these major actors and producers in the industry that make this work kind of for the same reason why I got in the documentary world. Like, I want to do stuff that's separate from that world. I want to do stuff that I feel like is giving back to humanity. So they have these. So there's so many different pots of money for documentary filmmakers. And I'm glad you asked me that question.
So did you learn how to, how did you find out where to apply for the grant?
Yeah.
How did you learn how to write the grant?
That's what I found out working at the NIC.
Is that kind of the growing pains?
That was the growing pains. That's what I found out working at the NIC. The NIC introduced me to the world of grant writing, and the world of grant writing for film, and the world of grant writing for production, which is really just all front end, right? Because then after you get past the actual production, then everything else kind of looks like every other. You might go to Sundance and sell it to a distributor, all that stuff. Netflix.
Well, with all the streaming services, I was going to say,
so it's so many
much
options right now, right? And so, but yeah, that's where I learned that particular art is who, I mean, I'm telling you, man, being in that world, it was like, you ever been like in a house and there was a door you never saw before? That's what it felt like. It felt like I was in this house of film for all these years. And there was this door, and I opened the door, and it's like this vast space, and I was like, "What is this?" And so there's people in there telling me about grants and all these foundations and people and structures and funders and fellowships and just so many different options. For women, for Native Americans, for people of color, for people that went to this college, for people that want to talk about the environment, And then I started visiting the filmmakers, seeing how some of these people live, and the fact they have homes in 3 different cities, and I'm like, all right, okay, now we're talking, now you're talking, my kind of lifestyle, and because that's really the other thing is, but what Bill said is important to that, right? Because with every industry is there's two sides. The one side is the opportunity. The other side is what do you have to do to get access to the opportunity. The documentary film world is the long game, right? That's the downside. Yes, there's a ton of money, but you take Saltwater, the Saltwater Vibes, the doc we're working on right now, we're probably not going to finish shooting that until 2022, 23.
Right.
That might not see the light of day until 23, 24.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Wow.
So there's a bunch of money involved, yes, but it's what you said.
Takes the time.
You got to take the time.
Have the patience to get
if you want to do it right?
Yeah.
Now, if you just want to shoot a documentary and you don't want to make any money, you want to throw it on YouTube and shoot it in a month, you can do that. But I'm not trying. I'm trying to. I have a son, and I like to travel.
But you also want to make good stuff, right?
Right. And you want to make good. That's my thing. Yeah. I want to make stuff that. I want to make stuff that airs nationally.
There's a mic there.
I want to add stuff that I want to make stuff that airs internationally. I want to make the kind of stuff that changes lives.
So you're directing it. You're not the executive producer. You're in there asking the questions.
Both. So I do some directing, but mostly producing is my thing.
Okay.
Producing is definitely my thing. I prefer producing. Directing is not really my strong suit, but I do direct some. So for right now, I'm the director and producer on Saltwater, but we've had several conversations about bringing in a director for that project, which is really where we are right now.
Well, and for the audience that doesn't know the difference between director and producer, I think it's important to understand. I think one of the other fascinating things for me about you is that you have the capability of being behind the camera and all that kind of stuff, but you generally don't.
Right.
You're generally so the director is the person that takes the script or the concept or the vision from the producer or whoever is putting it together, and the director actually puts together all the elements that make it happen.
Yes.
And so
that's the difference.
You bring in a director of photography, somebody to shoot it. You bring in the crew. You put together all the pieces.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is that I came into this business from the technical part of it. Like, I just love having my hands on a camera, and I love the idea of getting the image, and I love the idea of. I remember that music video you and I did, and I don't know if you remember this, Hemingway's, many years ago, where Hendrix is now, but we had planned on shooting a music video in there, and there was no power in the upstairs.
Oh,
and so,
yeah.
you remember this?
Yeah.
And so we went upstairs, and I was going to take the lights upstairs and everything, and I was like, there's no power. So we started looking around. We realized that we had access to the basement.
Yeah.
And in the basement, there was one light bulb hanging from the thing, and everything else was dark around this sphere of this light bulb.
Yeah.
And we shot everything around that light bulb.
Yeah, we did.
And it just came out so much better than the concept that we had planned.
It really did. It was so dope.
But that's where I get so attracted to this business, is seeing, because like I can get excited about that and just hold it in a little box, and it doesn't have to please anybody else. I just love the idea that we found that one light bulb. And that was 10 years ago.
I'm actually so glad you said that, because that's one of the things that people need to understand. I think I would like to see understood more when it comes to the film world. And I think you probably hear people say this all the time, but there's more than just one or two roles. Like, there's so many different roles. And so I'm not tech minded.
Right.
I understand tech because it's a part of my business, so you don't have a choice, right? We live in, if you're in a business like ours, you live in a computer-based tech world, period. Right. So you got to know what gigabytes and all that. You have to, you don't have a choice. But I'm not a tech person, right? I'm also not an artist. That's really what directors are. Directors are more like artists. So when you go to the museum, you go, how did they even think of that? That's a director. Mm-hmm. He can somehow, look at the camera and go, no, it needs to be here, and turn it this way. And then you go, wow, I would have never saw that had you not been there. My brain doesn't work like that. I was never good at drawing, never good at freestyle, anything. So it's not really my, logistics is my world, right? I understand how to put pieces together and how to put people together, right? Yeah. And so that is, that is a completely different art form in and of itself, which is where I live as a producer. And so, assembling the pieces and parts and making that into the whole is really more my world. And so I think it's important for people to know those kind of things, because a lot of times when they're looking at industries like ours, I think people get really pigeonholed, and they're like, oh, you do this thing right here. They kind of look at it. I feel like most people look at all tech industries as like a radio. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, you just turn this on.
And there it is. And in most cases, nowadays...
And turn it up a little bit.
And turn it down. When I first started in the business, you had to finesse just about everything to make it work.
Oh, yeah.
I remember being on sets early on where lighting was magic.
Oh,
like,
it was magic.
Like when you got the lighting working...
It was a truck. 10 trucks. Yeah.
The grips had to wear gloves because you could get shocked. You know, there was power issues everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Now that we're dealing with LEDs... And hot.
What? Smoke. It would smoke.
Yeah, I was on a set one time where an HMI exploded in the room. You might have been there, but it was like an HMI exploded like a bomb went off. The whole place went dark, filled with smoke. Everybody had to get out of the house. Like, it was one light. One light blew up. And
those days, thankfully.
But I don't think you have to finesse the technology as much as you used to.
Which is a bad and good thing, right?
Right,
it's a bad and a good thing.
But that does is that democratizes the technology end of it, right? So that makes it much more interesting.
Bad and good.
Right, but it makes it much more interesting for those of us that make content like this, that make videos, make photography, that write, that make music, because you take out that barrier to entry of having, because I remember when I first started, I had regular DV cameras, right? I had little tape-based DV cameras.
I remember.
I always felt lesser than the guys that had the broadcast cameras, you know? And I always felt, I would go into a media bank and I'd be shooting for a press conference and I'd have my little camera, and then all these other guys around me had these giant cameras.
I used to be one of those guys.
But it's so democratized now, because now what's happening is, our cameras have gotten smaller even, which is great. But the quality has gone up, and all of that technology has just been smoothed right out. And so now it's down to, how do you tell a story? How do you reach an audience? Right. How do you evoke a response in the people watching? And I think that's what's similar to where to our kind of trajectories.
Yes.
Is that you went towards documentary because you wanted to make something that meant something, that had feeling to it, and I wanted to do the same thing, but I wanted to do it in the commercial world.
Yeah.
And because I think we don't work with. I mean, I can't think of anybody we work with where we don't just love what they do and really want to make sure that they get their thing out there. And I think it's so important that was one of the reasons why we don't do car spots, or because we just know that
if we were ever to do a car spot, it's going to be totally different than any other
right because it needs to have meaning. It needs to mean something, and there's so much commoditization out there of media and different things,
especially now.
And I remember talking to you a lot of times over things you called it media literacy. Like I would get somebody to share an article with me, and I go, I don't have any idea how to tell whether this is real or not.
Right.
Like I don't have any idea how to know whether this is a credible source, whether this person's saying the truth, or and I'd send them over to you, and we would talk about those things.
Right.
Is that still part of stuff that you do?
Media literacy is a huge part of it. As a matter of fact, we're working on a bill right now with Frank Baker and Seth Rose and Ray Felder. We're not working with Ray. Ray's on the committee, and she has been very supportive of the bill, HB 332, which is trying to get media literacy introduced into the curriculum in South Carolina, particularly in ELA, in English.
Yeah.
Right? Because the way that we read and write has changed.
Right.
And that essentially is what media literacy is all about. It's teaching humans this new language that we've kind of been thrown on us as a society, which is now we get all of our information from a screen. Well, what does that mean?
And randomly from a screen.
And randomly.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is we're trying to put the rules that we learned in regular English class onto this device, and they don't mesh. Which is why, one of the many results of us not being media literate is disinformation and misinformation. It's because we're trying to apply the rules of another medium to this medium. And it's so interesting when you talk to me about media literacy, when I talk to people about it, because people act as if it's a new concept, but it really isn't, right? This same thing happened when books became a thing.
But it's something that we've had to contend with.
The same way that phones became a thing. The printing press, yeah. Like when
books have been around for a while.
The printing press is what I meant. Thank you so much for that, Brian. But when I say books, I specifically mean when the printing press came around and made books cheap. Now you didn't have to go to, back then, you would have to go to a professor. The only person that had access to that knowledge was the scientist at the university. Now every other student in class has the same book. Right? And the same thing happened. You had a proliferation of fake news because now everybody had a book or could make a book. And it created this society where no one knew up from down, no one knew left from right, but it was only because this new medium had been introduced and people have been trying to apply the rules of whatever they used before.
But man, the volume of it has just gone
just like then.
Exponential.
I mean, the volume of it then went exponential, just like the volume of it is now. But we have to do something that's very hard as a society, which is what they had to do. They literally had to change the way they educated the human population because of books. And the printing press. And that is the same thing we have to do now. And that's what I advocate for as a media literacy advocate and educator is we have to change the way that we're learning because screens are it. Yeah. And I'm sure some people still will read books, but you can no longer teach, particularly in K through 12, but also we got to figure out how we're going to re-educate the adult population because what's happening, particularly with disinformation and misinformation in the social media space, ain't coming from kids. It's coming from adults.
Well, it's coming from adults manipulating other adults.
Yeah, of course.
And that's the...
Yeah, and you don't know the difference because you're thinking, well, I read it, right? That's what somebody said to you. Well, that's what it says. But you're applying old rules.
But then you start to think of like, well...
I was actually listening to a book.
and
Grant Cardone said, it's not true unless you see it. You can hear it all day long, but it's not true unless you see it on paper.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is once... you see it written on the screen, it becomes then true. You can hear a conspiracy theory, but until you see that conspiracy theory written out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the same old journalistic integrity stuff. If you
Right.
have two independent sources, all that stuff, that's what's kind of falling behind right now.
Yeah, a lot of it is that too, but most of it is just it's new. It's new. I tell people all the time, like the human race right now, when it comes to the internet, we're like 13-year-olds.
Yeah.
And you probably know this more than anybody because you have a teenager. Like when you're 13, you think you know everything.
Yeah.
And nobody knows anything. And like you're quick to tell everybody, how come you don't know what I just learned 5 minutes ago? See, you suck. Because you don't know what I just learned 2 seconds ago on Google. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we're in this world now, and there's like this proliferation of information, and we're literally just out here like teenagers is going wild and crazy. Check this out. Look at this story. I bet you didn't know this. You know what I mean? Like all that, and without even stopping, like you do with your teenager, to go, where'd you hear that from?
Yeah.
Who told you that?
Well,
Do
and
whether or not that's real. My son, I mean, yeah, are there aliens? Maybe, but don't start.
Well, probably.
Drawing crop circles in my backyard because you read it on YouTube. Like, come on.
Yeah. Well, and I think the interesting thing about studying things like logical fallacies, I mean, they've been around for thousands of years, right?
Thousands of years.
Understanding things like confirmation bias. If I believe something, right now, it's the easiest time in the world to say, here are these 7 sources that support what I believe.
I have this great confirmation biases analysis that I like to use, particularly when I'm talking to adults, because everybody seems to get it, particularly if you're married or in a relationship.
Right.
There is a way that each spouse folds clothes or towels.
Mm-hmm.
And I guarantee you, to this day, one of you feels like one of you is doing it right and one of you is doing it wrong.
Yep.
Now, what is that right and wrong based on? Nothing but your own bias.
Or the way your mom did it, or whatever. Yeah.
Which is your own bias,
Right.
Right. And I always explain it that way because people go, oh yeah, you're right, because it's true. Like I know adults right now that are going to closet, be like, this towel's wrong. It's supposed to be rolled. And it's like, why is it supposed to be rolled? That's not a fact. It's just how you feel, and that's what bias is all about. It's based on your environment and what the information you've been able to glean. But that doesn't make it 1 + 1, right?
Well,
it's just your own
facts and feelings.
It's not even facts. It's just feelings.
Yeah,
It's
Right,
feelings
that's what I'm saying. That the difference in a lot of our conflict right now is people are operating on feelings and not facts.
Yeah, which is what happens with the towel, right? Because literally, I've seen spouses have arguments over folding clothes.
Oh, sure.
It's just like the way a shirt should be folded is an argument, but that's going back to what Brian said. That's feelings, like
Right. Well, and I tell you what's encouraging to me is that my 5th grader right now, they're studying propaganda in her ELA.
Oh, good.
So they're going through propaganda in wartime, like Nazi propaganda, but also, like what happened around World War II.
Yeah.
And they're relating it to, news stories that come out now, and how does that relate? And she's applying logical fallacies to it, which I think is fascinating.
It is.
Because I had never seen an elementary school that did that type of stuff, where they teach them about logical fallacies.
I'm hoping it becomes more popular because it's really, I'm certainly worried about our age group, but I'm even more so worried about the K-12 age group because all my son knows is iPad.
Oh, of course, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he was born, he doesn't even type.
Yeah.
When I ask him to search up something on Google, he just goes, "Hey Siri, when were dinosaurs dead?"
Do you feel like there's a do you feel like there's a way that as the generation gets, like, as old guys like me who, like he said, it has to be written down, right? I want it in print. But as the new generation gets going, they're going to be able to disseminate this stuff a little bit more on their own. Or is it going to get worse? You think?
It's worse.
Yeah.
There's studies coming out every year. Stanford does a study every year, and it's something like I don't want to quote, but it's literally, if you Google Stanford Media Literacy Study, anybody can find it.
Right.
And they do one every year, every 2 years, and what they're finding is almost 80% of students that are in high school have no idea between what's real or what's fake. Because you have to understand the difference between them, that generation, and us is they're always on a screen.
Oh yeah.
Right? Our generation, we put a screen down and come back to it.
Right.
Their generation, the screen is
all the time.
It's all screen all the time. It's almost like the screen and them is a part of the same world.
Oh yeah.
And so it's even worse because with so much information coming at you from a screen, you don't know who's behind it. You don't know what reason they're doing it for, and they're not even thinking about that.
Right.
I literally sometimes have to have arguments with my son about stuff that he's watched on YouTube.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's not even anything, of relevance. But I can imagine what that's going to get like when it is.
See, the way I always try to
actual
approach
relevance.
those conspiracy theories is like, tell me why you believe it. Tell me, as with my son, because he's
Right.
17-year-old. They're full of these theories. They know
Oh,
so much
totally.
about everything, and I'm just like, tell me why you think that's. Lay it out for me. Tell me why you think this is true. And he and I will have those discussions about it, and he believes this stuff when he hears, and he'll hear it from friends. He called me the other day and said that the stimulus that they just passed for the government, $1,400 of it is supposed to be for him, so he needs it. And he's like. What they told me, what my friend told me is that $1,400 of that is for me. So can you give it to me now and then just take it out of the money when it comes? And I'm like, no, you're a dependent. That means that
pay taxes.
You're expensive.
Right.
So
Get a job.
I'll tell you what, I'll allocate it for you, and then I'll just deduct the expenses off of it, and I'll give you what's left if there's anything left.
It's a different world, and what our work with media literacy and me as a media literacy advocate is how do we prepare the world for what's already here,
right?
And that's the work that we're trying to do is
not going anywhere. So
it's not going.
We can't
anywhere,
regret the fact that kids are into phones.
And I think that's really we're trying to. I keep seeing people try to do this using old rules. Like the first thing people will say was, "Well, get rid of Facebook," or "They go get rid of Instagram." Like. It doesn't matter how many Facebooks you get rid of and how many Instagrams you get rid of. It's never going away. Something else is going to pop up. Like, that's the wrong... I mean, does Facebook have a responsibility? Of course they do. They're a business. But the thing I always tell people is Facebook doesn't generate content.
Right.
People do.
Right.
So what are you going to do? You're going to blame Facebook for putting something that your aunt posted? Like, that's not their fault. They're just providing the platform. It's like... I try to put this analogy. Facebook is like the restaurant. Mm-hmm. They can't control the conversations that happen inside that restaurant.
Right.
Now, do they have the right to put somebody out if they say something like, fire?
Or they get loud and
of course, yeah, they do. But if he's a Republican or this guy's a Democrat or that guy believes in, aliens with dinosaur heads, like, they can't.
Right.
So, like... You can't be like, hey, that guy's having a conversation about aliens with dinosaur heads. Can you kick him out? And like,
Well, those are some of the most interesting conversations.
That's also an issue they're having right now.
Yeah, it's a
because they are kicking people out because they aren't. They're
tricky.
saying that. I mean, you have the First Amendment,
right?
That's where it gets. That's where there's the rub right now,
right?
Because you have a First Amendment, I have a First Amendment to say what I want,
right?
And if and they are saying, well. What you're saying is not appropriate, so you're out of here.
Yeah, I think, but again,
because it's a private company and it's a restaurant and it's a private restaurant, right? Mm-hmm. But in reality, it's a public platform.
It's a public platform, just like a restaurant is. What makes that? Well, I think what makes that tricky. I think it's more just to me personally, my own personal response, is I think what's making that so tricky right now is we're in the teenage stage, and we don't know really what to do. And so I think people are just so freaked out about
and
what
we don't
to do.
have the old guys to give us
dinosaurs,
opinions.
alien heads, you can't say that here.
I love the teenage analogy of society, right?
Yeah.
Because if that's the case, then we're getting all up in arms over global warming, and we don't know jack about it, right? We're getting all up in arms about all these different stuff.
About everything. But the one thing I will say, because there is a clear line when you're talking about public spaces, and the clear line was defined hundreds of years ago, which is you can't yell fire in a theater.
Yeah.
Right. So it's one thing to be able to believe that dinosaurs have, alien heads and birth, baby.
Yeah.
All right. That's one thing. It's another thing to say something that's going to threaten someone's life.
Well, and I think that's
the clear distinction that I think a lot of people are trying to muddy the waters there. They're trying to say, well, I can say anything I want. Yeah, but you can't say fire in a theater. That's different.
Well, and I think it's difficult because the arbiters of that control are unclear. Like,
yes.
Who's making the decision about
and they've
those
also are just people who created a business, and then all of a sudden they're the most powerful people in the world.
And a lot of it,
deciding what they get to do and what they don't get to do.
90% of that is bots anyway. So,
Yeah,
that's where it's real weird. Like I have always said.
But that goes back to his point, though, right?
I worry about the NSA guy who's assigned to follow me. Like, because that's a boring job. You know what I mean? But like, who's monitoring my Facebook? Because that's a boring job.
Brian brings up an excellent point, which is one of the things that media literacy educators always try to get people to see. Like, and this is the main difference between the printing press and now. The difference between the printing press and now is the speed of adaptability. Mm-hmm. Right? The printing press, even though it did create this curve where humans had to adapt to it, but there was a plateau. Mm-hmm. We're in an age where there's no plateau.
Mm-hmm. It just keeps going.
Technology is just continuing to go. So there's every single system that's controlled by humans is being turned upside down by technology. You can't legalize it fast enough. You can't educate it fast enough. You can't secure it fast enough. Has anyone actually done the legal due diligence on whether or not Elon Musk can even take people to space? We don't even have the rules in place to know.
Right.
We haven't even gotten that far.
I would think it falls under the FAA.
Maybe.
Well, let's go a year without a rocket exploding. So I think that's probably
by the time we, all of our systems are slow. Technology, they're doing, Google has a whole Moon X, it's literally moonshots. They're literally doing this every day. So by the time you come up with the rules for Elon Musk,
it's going to be changed again.
It's probably going to be spaceships.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Private spaceships.
So, driverless cars are on the road now, and there are no rules for them.
Right.
Because our systems are too slow to be able to keep up with technology. And so what media literacy folks are trying to do everywhere is say, hey, this is an issue. Like, if we don't change the way that we're doing things down here, we can't keep relying on old ways of doing things to be able to adapt. We got to change, or else it's going to seriously be the what it is now, which is the tail wagging the dog. That's kind of where we are right now. We're literally following technology as opposed to being able to say, all right, let's kind of figure out what we got here.
Awesome.
But I believe that the solution to our problem is changing the way that we teach. I believe education, the way that we teach, has to fundamentally change. The reason why I say human beings aren't going to like that, because what does that mean? That's hard work. One of the things that we love to do, particularly in this country, is reform, right? Let's not change the law. Let's just add another section to it.
Or take a little section off.
Let's take a little section off. Let's pull a comma there. Yeah. Let's add another article, right? We'd rather do that than to say, you know what, that's not working. Let's get rid of that and figure out what works. That is the way, in my opinion, that we fix it.
Because then we create independent thinkers and not community thinkers.
That is, so the schools aren't creating independent thinkers.
No.
But that's the fundamental of changing the way we educate.
Yeah.
Not what we're educating.
Right.
Because there's a big difference.
Glad you made that
because
decision.
Right now people are changing what we educate, and that's not the right thing to do.
That's not the right thing to do.
It's spinning us off into the wrong direction.
Correct.
We have to change how we educate.
Yes.
And that's a major thing right now, because there's a lot of schools that are changing what they're educating and not how they're educating.
Which is Brian, you hit the nail on the head. It's one of the things I find interesting about the proliferation of technology. The first thing that schools did was go, hey, look at all the computers we have now. Hey, all of our kids have tablets. Oh yeah. So, you know what I mean? Like, if you haven't changed how they learn with that device, all you've done is apply your old rules of teaching on this device. So you literally, like my son, I remember when we went virtual, I was like, you know what, well, let me go ahead and get a computer for my son. So he has one at home. He has one in his room with a keyboard. And the school even gave him a laptop, right, that he could use too, which was really cool. Opens up the laptop. He opens the laptop. They have a password for him to enter. It's like letters and underscore and all that. And he's looking at the laptop. He's looking at the keyboard. He goes, so Dad, how do you do that?
Yeah.
And I said, perfect example. You gave them all devices they don't know how to use keyboards. You got to teach them how before you just go here.
Yeah.
Which is why Brian's
well, and I think what is interesting too, because we're still teaching them math in the the same math I learned, quadratic equations and long division and all that stuff, which I'm not sure how it relates. I'm sure somebody knows how it relates to being an adult.
I think it relates into how. So I think, though, like Brian just said, I think we still need to know algebra and calculus, right? But how you teach algebra and calculus has to completely change.
Yeah.
Because the way that they're applying the rules of algebra and calculus now, they're making spaceships to fly people to the moon.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're not just getting a job at AT&T no more, or getting a 30-year-old pension.
Well, what's really challenging is that, I think at a very early age if you're naturally good at that stuff. Because you take to it, you hear it, you go, oh yeah, I totally understand quadratic equations, right? Or you don't, which is where I am, right? Yeah. And so I'm never going to do space stuff. I'm never going to calculate rockets to the moon or whatever. Right. But if you are, then that's, I think, goes into the how. But I think if you are going to do that, and you know that by 6 or 7 or 8 years old, like you're super good at math,
I would actually push back on that a little bit.
Funnel in that
because
direction.
I think what you're saying makes sense. But I think that train is where a lot of people fall into, which gets to where Brian is. Because I hear this from educators all the time. Well, that's what they're into.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You see what happens? Now we end up taking this information that everybody needs to know and just giving it to these students over here, which is the wrong thing.
And then they can right.
Because everybody needs it, and the hard work is to say, okay, the more technical side of it maybe for these kids.
Then we start moving towards China, where you are going to be an expert, and you are going to be a dentist, and you are going to do this.
That's why I say it's challenging, because that's what we end up with. We end up with that type
siloing all the kids, which is the wrong thing to do. What you got to do is the hard work. You got to say, you know what, y'all, the way we teach is just old.
And in that realm, finding a way to have the most well-rounded education possible.
Yeah.
With a diverse group of people.
Yes.
Right? And so that is the challenge ultimately, because I grew up, I took all the advanced math classes going through high school, and then when I got done with high school, I'm like, I'm done with that. Right. I took calculus, I took it all. Yeah. And I'm like, and I knew it, and I could do it.
Right.
But then I started writing, and it switched down a whole nother thing in my brain, and I went a totally different route. But that didn't happen until college.
Look at that.
And see, I got into college and I took
I got into USC as a biology major.
Look at that.
Wow.
Look at that.
It requires a lot of math.
That's saying a lot.
And then I was like, I'm not doing that. Where's the media arts program? That's right.
But that says a lot. That says a lot about development. And it also says a lot about what I love about what you just said so much, Brian, is one of the fundamental things I think we have to change about education is diversity when it comes to education. Like, we're so siloed. We live in a society now where everything is accessible. And so the idea that someone can be siloed is really just an old way of thinking. Like, it has to be a very well-rounded approach that comes at things from different angles, which allows people the freedom to think, as opposed to keeping them trapped in systems of thinking, which is just a great way to, I was reading this book by Thomas Friedman. I can't remember the name of the book right now, but Thank You for Being Late. Thank You for Being Late is the name of the book. Appropriate. And one of the guys from Google that he interviewed said he believes education needs to change from a step-based system to more like riding a bike, where it's a continual process, as opposed to a first grade, second grade, third grade, 12th grade done. Right?
Well, it's very similar to Montessori then.
Yep, very similar to Montessori. Yeah. But you can continue it for life, as opposed to it just being, because that's the big problem right now when it comes to misinformation, disinformation, is everybody's going, okay, that's great for college and K-12, but what do we do about grandma? We don't have a system in place for grandma. Yeah. Or your uncle or your auntie. We don't have a system in place.
Unless you're going to become a doctor or a lawyer or something along those where it requires an advanced degree, college is not going to be necessary soon.
I completely agree.
And especially when you start giving it away for free.
On YouTube, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, you
I can literally take a course on YouTube and learn how to do it and make
like
money
Matt
off
Damon
of it.
says, I can get the same education you got for $1.50 in late fees, right? So, I mean, it's the more that becomes prevalent and the more the younger generations adapt to the technologies and are able to advance quicker, the colleges are going to have to adjust too.
Yeah, again.
And create value, because right now there's not a whole lot of value to go to college.
I was tripping. I met this. This guy called me to mentor this guy that wanted to get into video editing, and he wanted me to meet him and give him some tips and tricks and that kind of thing. And I was like, "Well, show me some of the stuff he did." And I'm looking at his video he did. It's incredible. It's like, all types of transitions, stuff that I don't even know if I could do. Because it's really not my forte anyway. And I'm like, how do you do this? He was like, "Oh, I don't know. It's all in the app."
And I'll tell you
and
something.
I was like, look at this. Like,
younger
this kid
people
is doing stuff I can't do, has no idea what he's doing, but he knows the right buttons to push.
I just assume nowadays when I run
world.
across younger people who are looking for work, that they're already great.
And they may not be great.
And then when they're not great, it's really
they've watched
disappointing.
enough. Because I was like, well, how did you get here? You know what he said? YouTube.
Yeah.
I just watched YouTube videos.
But there was a time when I would go to hire people and I'd have to go, all right, well, I'll help you.
Right.
Let me get you up to speed.
Yeah.
And now they're coming in good.
Yeah.
They're already good. They already know what they're doing.
Because they spent 10 hours on YouTube.
Yeah.
And they got it. They know how to color correct.
Yeah.
Just like that, where it took me 3 years.
Of course.
Learn how to color correct.
And banging your head against the wall until you realize how good it feels to stop.
Took them 3 minutes and 48 seconds and a subscribe button.
Right. That's awesome. Well, thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate you being here. And
Thank you. It was great.
See you next
Be
time.
sure to subscribe to us.
Oh, look at you.